Good morning again. It's Friday today, and we are going to try to cover chapters 9, 10, and 11 very briefly because it takes so long to upload these videos, and I haven't figured out a way to do it better. Anyway, looking at chapter 9, I realized that there's a lot of stuff you can do on your own. Maybe that you can read the material, and I will try to tackle the poems with you. Now, in Meaning and Idea, the editors get a little annoyed with people wanting to know meaning. Their feeling is that poetry should not mean but be. They say the meaning of a poem is the experience it expresses, nothing less. But as I said, to really learn to appreciate poetry, we probably need to know some of the mechanics. And one of the first poems here is Loveliest of Trees. I hope to put up a picture of that because my favorite cherry trees are always very beautiful here at Sacred Heart. But you may be familiar with this. A.E. Houseman, To an Athlete Dying Young. Terence, This is Stupid Stuff. And I've always loved this poem. And it says, Loveliest of trees, the cherry now is hung with bloom along the bough, and stands about the woodland ride, wearing white for Eastertide. I'll have to stop now because I reminded myself yesterday that I should tell you the page numbers, and that's page 806, and I'm also going to stop and close the door if I can figure out how to do that. Oh well, you'll just have to take a little break. And I'm back. This is also a very nice Easter poem. In England, the spring comes later, so the cherry is hung with bloom along the bough, wearing white for Eastertide. Now of my 70 and 10, 20 will not come again, and take from 70 springs a score, it only leaves me 50 more. And since to look at things in bloom, 50 springs are little room. About the woodland I will go to see the cherry hung with snow. People get a little confused in that middle verse. 70 and 10 would be 70. And in the Bible, this says is supposed to be the normal lifetime. 70 years or 80 years if all goes well, and beyond that is misery and pain. That's what the psalm says. But I usually ask students, how old is the poet? And they say 70, some people say 50, but actually he says of the 70 years, 20 will not come again. So he's actually 20. Take from 70 springs a score, it only leaves me 50 more. And since to look at things in bloom, 50 springs are little room. Even 50 years doesn't seem like a lot to savor the beauty of the springtime. About the woodlands I will go to see the cherry hung with snow. Well, the cherry may look as if it is hung with snow. It is actually blossoms, but that mention of snow at the end, we think of snow, coldness, winter, death. That's how poets do it. Now, the stopping by woods on a snowy evening, most students know pretty well. And again, a beautiful poem with a very fine message at the end. Houseman is going to spend as much as possible of his 50 years looking at nature, but the reality is we have practical things to do in life too. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Well, the last verse in both refers to the length of a lifetime. And as much as he would like to explore the woods that are lovely, dark, and deep, he can't. He's going to have to shake the reins, and the little horse will get to move on again because he has promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. A lot of living to do. Of course, literally, he has a long journey ahead of him, but really the poet is expressing the idea that he has to accomplish a great deal before he dies. And looking along, on page 811, Emily Dickinson, who is normally, well, she's an amazing poet. I really would like to do more work on her. And she says, faith is a fine invention when gentlemen can see, but microscopes are prudent in an emergency. You know, we're having a question right now about should we put more emphasis on faith or science in the coronavirus? Well, I think I agree with Emily on that one. And then moving along, I wanted to take Southern History on 815 because it's by Natasha Threadaway, and she is actually teaching at the University of Alabama now. She's put out several works of poetry and is a very fine poet. But in this one, Southern History, you get a sense of irony and maybe even bitterness, and also a sense of shame. At times when people say something that you really disagree with, or that may be immoral, or that you don't think are right, but you're too scared, or you don't want people to think less of you by standing up for things. But in this one, Southern History, she's giving a version of slavery that many people liked. The idea that the idea that African Americans were happy slaves. Before the war, they were happy, he said, quoting our textbook. This was senior year history class. The slaves were clothed, fed, and better off under a master's care. I watched the words blur on the page. Now, if the words blur on the page, chances are she has some tears in her eyes. No one raised a hand, disagreed, not even me. It was late. We still had Reconstruction to cover before the test, and luckily, 3 hours of watching Gone with the Wind. History, the teacher said, of the Old South, a true account of how things were back then. On screen, a slave stood big as life, big mouth, bucked eyes, our textbook's grinning proof. A lie my teachers guarded. Silent, so did I. Revisionist history really can be very upsetting. Like recently, a textbook came out saying that the slaves were in fact indentured servants. Indentured servants in Ireland and England meant people who had their passage to America paid, and then they worked for a number of years for the person who paid for the passage, and then they were free. They had a choice to come, and they were eventually freed. This was not the case with slaves. And I think, you know, if you read some of the books on slavery, you certainly wouldn't go along with this theory, although there are people who believe it. Now we have the lamb and the tiger, both of which we took. And then in tone, it says tone in literature may be defined as the writer or speaker's attitude toward the subject, the reader, or herself or himself. Page 820. And when you read through that, you recognize that tone can make a big difference. You know, just a little phrase like you did that can be you did that, which would be accusing, or you did that could be wondering, you did that, amazement. Tone makes a big difference. And as I've told you when we were writing, when we speak, there's so many clues. I'm very conscious now of trying not to give any clues, but when we write, we have to be much more specific and perhaps much more creative. On page 822, a wonderful poem by Emily Dickinson, "A narrow fellow in the grass occasionally rides. You may have met him, did you not? His notice sudden is. The grass divides as with a comb. A spotted shaft is seen, and then it closes at your feet and opens further on. He likes a boggy acre, a floor too cool for corn. Yet when a boy and barefoot, I more than once at noon have passed, I thought, a whiplash upbraiding in the sun. When stooping to secure it, it wrinkled and was gone. Several of nature's people I know, and they know me. I feel for them a transport of cordiality, but never met this fellow attended or alone, without a tighter breathing and zero at the bone." Isn't that a marvelous phrase? Without a tighter breathing and zero at the bone. I was down at our little creek one day, and I saw something that looked like a big overturned net, and as I went toward it, it started to uncoil, and it was a really big, bad snake. Okay, well, I won't try to do since there's no help, though I would if we were in school. Now, looking at 827, My Mistress's Eyes, we took this poem when we did Renaissance literature, and most of you thought it was typical of Renaissance literature. It's really not. By the time Shakespeare came along, the old ideals of the sonnet, as delineated by Petrarch, had become very trite, and Shakespeare in this poem is saying that his mistress is not all the outlandish and unbelievable things that other poets write about, but she is in reality much better than the lies they told. The Oxen by Thomas Hardy refers to a really nice legend that on Christmas Eve all the animals pay homage to the birth of Jesus. Christmas Eve and 12 of the clock. Now they are all on their knees, an elder said, as we sat in a flock by the embers in hearthside ease. We pictured the meek, mild creatures where they dwelt in their strawy pen. Nor did it occur to any one of us to doubt they were kneeling then. So fair a fancy few would weave in these years. Yet I feel if someone said on Christmas Eve, "Come, see the oxen kneel in the lonely barton by yonder coombe our childhood used to know," I should go with them in the gloom, hoping it might be so. Thomas Hardy was really an atheist, but a kind of a sad atheist. He has a poem about the fact that when people are annoyed with him for not believing, he says, well, not believing is like being a bird having a broken wing. You really would like to believe. And I was going to do the apparition, but it's a little bit racy. Then if you look on 835, Dover Beach, you may remember that it was in a couple of sections. It actually has 3 or 4 verses, and initially, the poet is on Dover Beach, up on the heights. The chalk cliffs of Dover are something that British people love, the way Americans love mom and apple pie, and they are actually very, very white as you come in from France. Now he is there. This is a dramatic monologue. He talks about the sea being so calm that you can look across and see the lights on the French coast. France is only about 17 miles away across the channel. And then he says, listen, you hear the grating roar of the pebbles. And doesn't that just make you, it's a beautiful scene, the moon on the water, seeing the lights in France. But when you hear the sound of the pebbles, it makes you think of the Aegean and Sophocles, the great person who wrote great tragedies, that sound brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. And he said, we here in this northern sea hear it too. And then he bemoans the fact that the sea of faith, which once upheld England, which was like a garment, lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. The sea of faith has gone. Now, he's writing this during the Victorian period, and for many people, I believe it was 1859, Darwin's Origin of the Species really had a tremendous effect on their faith, because up until then, they had very happily accepted the Bible as fact, but the geologists and the biologists, and Darwin in particular, came to realize that evolution was most likely a fact. And he says, it used to be that faith upheld things, but now I hear only the long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. And then very famous last verse, ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world, which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, has really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. I think those lines are among the most pessimistic in the English literature. Everything we see that's beautiful really gives us neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. The reality, he says, is that it's kind of like we are dropped down on a dark beach in the midst of a battle, and the ignorant armies clash by night. Well, you know, it can be very hard in a battle to know who's who, especially at night. As I said, very, very pessimistic. Now, we won't take the whole of Church Going by Philip Larkin, one of my favorite poets. You may remember we had about the one about reading. He believes it's a future time when nobody believes, and all churches have been abandoned. Weeds grow there, nobody cares. But in the final verse, he recognizes that there is something very special about a church building, even if nobody ever went there. A serious house on serious earth it is, in whose blent air all our compulsions meet, are recognized and robed as destinies. Our compulsions meet, are recognized and robed as destinies, and that much can never be obsolete, since someone will forever be surprising a hunger in himself to be more serious, and gravitating with it to this ground, which he once heard was proper to grow wise in, if only that so many dead lie round. You know, many country churches have a cemetery right with them, but I love that, a serious house on serious earth it is. And the idea that even after people stop believing, and sometimes we seem to be in a post-Christian age, we're almost countercultural in believing, especially as Christian believers, but he recognizes that there was always something that drew people who were in search of meaning to this serious house on serious earth. Now, the musical devices, I have down here, alliteration. All right, you know alliteration is repeating of the first letter. Full fathom 5, thy father lies. And we have one of Ogden Nash's little poems that I like. The turtle. The turtle lives twixt plated decks, which practically conceal its sex. I think it clever of the turtle in such a fix to be so fertile. In such a fix to be so fertile. He has other poems like that. You might want to look him up. But I'm looking, so alliteration on the next page, the repetition of vowel sounds. Sorry, I skipped down that. The repetition of initial consonant sound, as in tried and true, and, you know, tongue twisters, she sells seashells, safe and sound, fish or fowl, rhyme or reason, all alliteration. Now, assonance, S-O-N, son means sound. And in sonnet, that means little sound. It's only 14 lines. So assonance, repetition of A, E, I, O, and U. For the leaping spirit greenly of trees. Beautiful poem by E. Cummings. I thank thee, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping spirit greenly of trees. Lots of E sounds there. Now, rhyme is the repetition of the accented vowel sound, and that's usually the end word. Masculine rhyme is a single syllable, and feminine rhyme is when the rhyme sounds involve two or more syllables, as in turtle and fertile, spitefully and delightfully. It's two syllables at the end, and usually the first of those syllables is accented. I don't have much truck with that. I mean, rhyme is rhyme. Now, internal rhyme, one or more rhyming words within the line, and end rhyme, of course, is at the end. Approximate rhyme, and if you look down there at 843, that night when joy began, our narrowest veins to flush, we waited for the flash of morning's leveled gun. Now, began and gun are really what we call slant rhyme or approximate rhyme, and flash and flush, same thing. So that's pretty much that. Now, if you look on 844, wonderful Villanelle by Theodore Retke called The Waking. Many people like this, and I think you will too. Now, you may remember I told you a Villanelle is a very particular form. If you go back and look at The Art of Losing, you may see in your notes that I spelled that out for you. It's a poem with 5 3-line verses and a final 4-line verse, and there are only 2 rhyme sounds throughout. Now, in verse 1, the first line and the third line repeat through the poem as the last line of the verses, and these 2 lines are the final 2 lines of the poem. So if you'd have a look, I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I feel my fate in what I cannot fear. I learn by going where I have to go. All right, I wake to sleep. Some people would say I live life to eventually die and take my waking slow. I feel my fate in what I cannot fear. Is that perhaps finally death? Something we can't really fear because we can't really imagine it. But this line, I learn by going where I have to go. We think by feeling. What is there to know? I hear my being dance from ear to ear. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. Of those so close beside me, which are you? God bless the ground, I shall walk softly there and learn by going where I have to go. Light takes the tree, but who can tell us how? The lowly worm climbs up a winding stair. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. Great nature has another thing to do to you and me, so take the lively air and lovely learn by going where to go. This shaking keeps me steady. I should know. What falls away is always and is near. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I learn by going where I have to go. And I'm going to pause for just a minute. Well, I think I've got that started again. And just talking about this poem, it's a beautiful poem. It's very melodic, but it's also somewhat difficult. And just going through it again, I wake to sleep. Well, we get up in the morning with the intention of sleeping at night, but also eventually death, and take my waking slow. I enjoy the times of being conscious. Now, some people see this poem as an acceptance of the fact that life is all about change. I feel my fate in what I cannot fear. I learn by going where I have to go. We think by feeling. Well, most of our experience of life is based on emotion, perhaps, rather than logic or learning. What is there to know? Well, you're going to learn by going where you have to go. I hear my being dance from ear to ear, a joyous sense of being alive and being conscious. Of those so close beside me, which are you? I enjoy getting to know people. God bless the ground. Now, ground is capitalized here. I'm not so sure, but the ground of our being. Could it be that he's referring to God? Julian of Norwich says, all shall be well in the ground of our being. I shall walk softly there. I will be careful of nature and learn by going where I have to go. Light takes the tree. There could be a religious meaning there. The tree of the Garden of Eden, tree of knowledge of good and evil. Light takes the tree. Well, I see Jesus as being the light of the world. But who can tell us how? Maybe it refers to redemption, or that's just something I'm thinking about. The lowly worm climbs up a winding stair. This really seems to refer to evolution, that we come from, well, probably microbes initially. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. Great nature has another thing to do to you and me. Well, I think that pretty much refers to eventually death. So take the lively air and lovely, learn by going where to go. Enjoy life, savor life. There's a carpe diem element here. And lovely. Now, does this mean that we should, in a lovely way, learn by going where to go? Or is it referring to someone you're speaking to? This shaking keeps me steady. Possibly knowing that life is all about change gives us a perspective that keeps us steady. I should know. Well, Radke, I think, eventually committed suicide, was a very sensitive person, wrote marvelous poetry, but did have problems with depression. What falls away is always, we lose, and is near. Death, perhaps. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I learn by going where I have to go. Now, on 846, God's Grandeur, by Gerard Manley Hopkins, remember, a Jesuit priest, wrote powerful poems, possibly the best or one of the best writers of religious poetry in English. But when he says the world is charged with the grandeur of God, being charged like an electrical charge, the difference between something plugged in and something with the plug out. And his image of the way that life has bleared and smeared what God has created. But in the second part, because it is a sonnet, he says, and for all this, nature is never spent. Nature is never used up. And we see this in this beautiful springtime. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights off the black west went, notice all the alliteration and assonance there. O morning at the brown brink eastward springs. In spite of how we work hard to destroy this beautiful earth that God has given us, the Holy Spirit broods over the world, and with each sunrise, there is a chance again to see the beauty and preserve the beauty. Morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. I have done workshops and retreats on Gerard Manley Hopkins, and after you get out of school, you might like to come back and go through one with me. I think that's pretty much it for this chapter, except for nothing gold can stay. I went out last week and tried to take pictures of the yellowish green leaves that depict this. And it is true that the very first buds often are golden and then they turn green. But he's speaking in a wider sense of how Eden and we with sin He says, nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaves of flower. Now you think about the blossoms on the trees, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf. The golden leaf or the blossom becomes a regular green leaf. So Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. Nothing gold. The most beautiful things are ephemeral. Vocabulary word. Okay, I just noticed that that's 30 minutes, and I think that's enough. I will try to wind up some of these chapters and hope that I can upload them. I hope you have a good day, and I would really much rather be teaching you in person. But take care, and God bless you.